Welcome back to another episode of the Rankable Podcast. This is a special Black History Month episode. I have here Director of Client Strategy at iPullRank, Shantel Branch, and our Office and Special Projects Manager, Neferkara Aaron. I am so happy to have both of you here so we can get deep into the weeds and have this conversation. How are you doing today?
Very good. And first and foremost, happy Black History Month.
Yeah, happy Black History Month. Halfway through it.
All right.
Yeah, so I'm excited. Earlier this month, we did a fireside chat with some of the Black men in the organization, myself included. We had founder and CEO Mike King, as well as account manager Vital Parker, and we kind of just went through the experience of working in corporate America and what that life is like for Black men. And for me, this is a really exciting conversation to have because I now get the perspective of what that is like for Black women from my two coworkers.
It's a joy.
So, yes. I think that we all share a unique experience, but I do believe that for Black women in particular, there's another side of it that is a unique experience to specifically you two. So I want to talk about some of the experiences and just some of the triumphs, some of the tragedies, etc., that you both have experienced within your careers. So one of the things that we discussed as Black men, but I'd love to get your perspective on it, is just like this idea of professionalism and how you carry yourself in the workplace. And oftentimes we experience that through a different lens from whether it's our co-workers or leadership. And as Black women, I believe that you have a unique experience. So could you just speak to that? I don't know, Shantel, if you want to go first.
Why me first?
I think you have so much experience.
Let the old person go first. It's like, you're old. You go first. Shantel, tell us what it was like in the 1900s to work in corporate America.
You gotta chill out.
Well, now that you've asked, let me tell you about the 1900s in corporate America. So, professionalism, and what does that mean? I believe that professionalism is a concept that's real. Yes. But I also believe for Black people, men and women, your professionalism being questioned comes in many forms. As you all know, all of us on this call understand what it's like to when you maybe get upset, for someone to maybe say, oh, don't get so upset. But you've obviously seen your counterparts. I don't know. Once I saw a person throw a shoe. This person was a white person. She threw a shoe. She screamed, yelled, and cursed out an entire floor of people. And I assumed I would never see her again. And there were excuses made for her misbehavior. And then she was back 2 days later, as if nothing happened. And she was in charge of some very important work. Whereas if you just simply express displeasure about a circumstance in a situation, work-wise, and you maybe say, this is wrong, or maybe if you happen to curse, because I would say that over the years, cursing in the workplace has been more allowable than in the past. So even if you don't use a curse word, you just use firm language to say, like, this is unacceptable to me, your professionalism is questioned. When you advocate for yourself, sometimes your professionalism is questioned. Sometimes when you question leadership, your professionalism is questioned. And I've worked in a lot of spaces that I was definitely the minority, like big time. You know, I knew the names of all the Black people that I worked with. Before getting onto the digital marketing side, I was in print. And the newspaper world is notoriously not a place where you see a lot of Black faces outside of support roles. So when you get into places and spaces where you're questioning or you're asking for what you believe you deserve, if there's any type of energy that could be said to be negative, it's like, well, you have to be more professional. So there's that. And then there's when customers sometimes would use that against you, where they come to your manager and say, oh, this person's unprofessional. And you'll hear things like, well, you know how you are.
Yeah.
It's extremely heavy. So to that point, Neferkara, like, have you experienced that, some of those similar experiences? Because I know for certain I have.
I have, but I would definitely suggest that people take Chantel's practice a little bit more than mine, because I've just literally ignored people. I would not recommend that. And this is probably more of like a millennial standpoint, but I think oftentimes, if and when my professionalism was questioned, I wouldn't say anything in that moment, because I feel like I would need to just kind of like gather myself. And it would be something that I would revisit and speak to the person about. I don't necessarily have a specific example at the top of my head, but
yeah.
I have literally just said okay and walked away. So yeah, would not recommend though. Don't do that.
I completely understand. And to that point on professionalism, one of the things that I find really interesting is that for us, it can be difficult just to exist as a Black person, in general in the world, but specifically in America. And we face a different set of traumatic experiences pretty constantly, to the point where I do feel like even internally within our culture, but externally, I feel like there are often times where people don't understand what it's like to consistently see Black bodies on television. They don't understand what it's like to watch Black men and women be killed at the hands of police. They don't understand the idea of seeing that every day and being expected to walk into work and still display the same level of professionalism, still get your work done. You're not really expected to be emotional over these people that you don't know. But I think there's a connection between Black people in which we know these people, we know their struggles, and we know these stories all too well. So for you guys, what is that experience like when you experience something like watching Breonna Taylor on television, and then you experience going through the trial, and every day when you're expected to come into work and just do your job, in those moments where maybe you don't feel like doing your job because there are more important things at hand. Can you explain what it's like to not have, to feel like you don't necessarily have a support system internally, within the workplace, and just like what is that like? Like how does that feel, and how do you navigate those feelings?
Neferkara, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think it's very stressful, right? And I think it leads to you, and I know, this is coming up, but I think it also leads into imposter syndrome and just you doubling back on the things that you probably know how to do innately, right? And then it also leads to you doing your work incorrectly. So not having that support, it's more so of that you're just putting on a mask, right? To kind of just get through the day. And of course, the day drags, right? And of course, sometimes people really just have no clue as to how you're feeling, and there is a lack of empathy. So the way that you have to move throughout your day isn't as necessarily as easy as everyone else is moving through their day. So I feel like that's not the experience that I had here, because I was at iPullRank during the pandemic, but it was definitely stressful because it it felt like every day there was something happening. If it wasn't Breonna Taylor, there was somebody else getting shot. There were things happening within our own communities. And even recently retired niggas, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it. I don't necessarily want to talk about it. And sometimes I think it's important for your coworkers to understand that that's not something that you necessarily want to talk about at that moment in time, but to just keep that in mind, that that is something that might be present within, the person's community, or just them having to go through everyday life. So, and then for Shantel, I have a question too. Like, how did you deal with that being client facing as well?
Well, I'm going to take you guys back to George Zimmerman.
Yeah.
Okay. So when George Zimmerman was acquitted, I came to work and I was very pissed. And my manager at the time, who was a white man, he asked me a question and I was like, well, with everything that's going on, I'm just like not here. And he was like, what's going on? And I remember looking at him. He was the nicest person or whatever. We lived in the same city, New York. And I was just like, you don't know? And he's like, oh, yeah, I did hear about that. And it's like, and I remember an older colleague got up and came to my cubicle after he walked away. And he was really kind. He's since passed away, but he came, he just talked to me and we talked about it. And, like how messed up everything was. And I think we maybe talked about what we were going to do with our day, because previous to COVID, client facing meant putting your shoes on and strutting your stuff into a taxi, subway, or whatever, and going to see clients and sit in their spaces. So imagine wearing that and then having to sit down and like come off the elevator and just get into it. And you have to do it. But knowing that people had no idea what was going on with you, and these are people who worked in media, was very illuminating. And it happened repeatedly. People would it just wasn't something that was real to them. And it's not everyone, but it's enough people where there's an impact. I think people have gotten better about having consideration. So I think we're in a better place in 2013 when it comes to that. So even if people are feigning or having faux empathy, at least they're trying to address what is potentially ailing their colleagues, whether they're Black, white, or whatever. But yeah, I remember that very specifically with that George Zimmerman verdict being like, and just remembering, because I forgot. It's not a safe space.
On the point of professionalism and just like the idea of that, I think that's something that we talked about earlier. Shantel, you talked about somebody throwing a shoe. And I was just wondering about
that's insane.
Maybe some of the microaggressions that you both as Black women have experienced throughout your careers, any stories that you have, and how, to that point, your response can often be labeled as unprofessional. And oftentimes people see, people throw rocks and then hide their hand. And then you're left to deal with the cleanup of everything else. And you always feel like there are high expectations for you. So can you just speak to some of those microaggressions that you've experienced and what it was like to try to navigate that, where you're like, I feel like I have to say something and I feel like I have to advocate for myself. But I also, again, we talked about this in the other fireside chat as people labeling you the angry Black man, and nobody wants to be labeled the angry Black woman in the workplace. So can you just speak to that?
Neferkara, do you want to go first?
Nope.
Well, I mean, how much time do we have on microaggression? Are we clear about what microaggressions are? So, like, the fact that like a microaggression is when someone just says a little, it's a little dig, or it's just a question. I just asked you a question.
That's a favorite of mine.
Are you the first person in your family to go to college? Or, oh, your parents were married? Oh, so it's just you and your sister, like no other siblings? Oh, well, she's different from you. You're different. How am I different? Tell me. Different. Okay. Or we could just, I mean, we only have a certain amount of time. I could keep going, you know. Um, you know, sassy, watch sassy when you're speaking to Black women. Also watch motherly. I'm not your mom. If I was your mom, I could hit you for what you just said to me, but I'm not. I'm a colleague. I'm not your mom. I'm never your mom. I'm actually no one's mom. So don't do that, because that's another way to kind of like diminish. If you understand how people perceive Black women, there are only two ways sometimes that they perceive us. Either they perceive us as a sexless motherly figure or a uncontrollable whore. So either way, that doesn't work for what we're trying to do, because we're in a work environment. So what are you doing? You write well. Seems like you know more words than me. I do. You know, that's a big one. You write well, you speak well. I always say it's the only language I speak. Mastering it would have been, it was super easy. You know, what's it like to live in Queens? It's cool. What else? Once I was carrying a Gucci bag as it was, and this lady, who I don't know what she was thinking, walked up to me and said to me, "Where did you get that bag from?" And I looked at her, and I remember looking at the bag, and I said, "The Gucci store." And she was like, "Oh, well, you know." And I was like, I don't know. Where else will we get Gucci bags from? I mean, Neiman Marcus, Bloomingdale's, Macy's. But what were you inferring, sis? Because it's Gucci bag from the Gucci store. Like, where you go to get bags. So, I mean, I could keep going.
Yeah. I think these are questions that just
I think we got the point.
Yeah. Would you ask this question? Would you pose this question to your white colleagues? Would it ever happen? I mean, and to a point that we spoke to before we hopped on this call, before we started the episode, we were talking about the Black woman's experience with Black men. And I think that these microaggressions are things that on your end, you've probably been on the receiving end of these from Black men as well.
Not really, because
not really.
Well, everybody sit down. Not really. Because more often than not, I didn't see very many Black men in corporate America. And typically, Black men in corporate America, up until very recently, didn't really hang with Black women like that in the office, because their maleness allowed them to fold into the maleness of it all. So what you would find is it was almost like, not always, but frequently enough to notice that if the person hadn't determined that they would like to have sex with you, they didn't really communicate with you that much if they didn't have to. Conversely, there's been numerous articles written about how Black women function in corporate America, because it tends to be like a cross-functional socialization. So you could be the VP, you could be a manager, a salesperson, an admin, and an intern, and those people spend time together. That does not always move you towards advancement, because you're not being invited to the tables where someone's going to tap you and pull you. You're looking for comfort. So you could be like a VP and your only friend is like an admin, and y'all are making a friendship, but from a business relationship, you two are not going to be able to do what the bros do, which is kind of come together and elevate in bro culture. And the further some, not all Black men, get away from the association to Black women, makes them more palatable to be brought into the fold, because we're just bros.
Yeah, I think that leads into a topic that I really want to discuss, which is something that recently that we've seen is that studies are showing that Black women are among the most educated population in the country. And yet and still, there's still, white men are still 8 times as likely to reach the executive C-suite level roles. So with that being said, there are 2 questions that I have about this. Like, knowing those numbers, like, how do you deal with imposter syndrome and just that feeling of potentially, like, knowing that you're qualified and then still seeing people, of course, excel in their careers maybe a little bit faster than you might have throughout your career, knowing that you're more qualified than them? How do you handle, like, the feeling of not being good enough, like looking around, to your left and your right, and like knowing that you're producing quality work, but not being able to break through and get the promotion or to be recognized for your work? And sometimes, as a Black woman and as a Black man, I know I've experienced, sometimes you'll even have work that you put a lot of time and effort into where other people are taking full credit for it. Whether it's campaigns or anything like that. So I would love to hear, like, your perspective on just what your approach is and what your thoughts are
on. I think that the good thing about this is that we're in 2023, right? And there are a couple of things to that. If you have a discussion with, your managers and anyone within the company and let them know how you're feeling and it's still not being addressed, leave, because there will always be somebody else that will appreciate. There will always be another company that will appreciate the work that you're doing. And I think a big thing as well that I started to do is, even amongst like my friend group, I talk about how I feel about certain things, and even like sharing salary goals and just general career goals. It helps for people within different fields for them to chime in on their experiences, what they've done if they've faced a similar situation, and how they dealt with it. And I think having that set of transparency among people throughout different fields, it also gives you a different perspective on how to maybe address things within your field that maybe hasn't been addressed before. So as far as imposter syndrome, like I just had to kind of settle within myself that the more that I kind of settle within that, the worse that I'm going to get. So I had to really like settle into just like saying, like, you wouldn't have gotten this job or whatever job it is if you didn't know what you were doing. And clearly you know what you're doing. So the more time you waste feeling unsure, the worse things are going to get. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's amazing insight. I think obviously at varying levels, but I think we all sometimes, especially when you're early on in your career, it can be easy to slide into that happy to be here type of thought process where maybe you're not willing to advocate for yourself if you're doing the work for, for things like promotions and higher salary and things of that nature. So I think it's a really, really good mindset to just tell yourself that you belong. Like, if you made it through the interview process and they hired you for a reason. Like, they didn't spend all this money to go through this onboarding process, because it's more than just your salary. They brought you here for a reason, and there's a reason why they believe in the work that you do. So I think it's important to settle into that idea and find ways to remind yourself of who you are.
Yeah. For me, I do not think that I've ever really suffered from imposter syndrome. I think that what I suffered from was no longer believing that people were going to do the right thing. So the opposite, I would say, of imposter syndrome is this person is going to eventually do something shitty to me. This is going to happen over and over and over again. People who are less smarter than you are going to be promoted repeatedly. People who are less smarter than you are going to get opportunities repeatedly, or chances repeatedly, or if they're choosing between you and someone else to who to lay off first, they're not going to choose you. They're going to choose you because they're going to prioritize the other. And I think for me, that took a heavy toll on me. And professionally, about 7 years ago, I just had like I was in a terrible cycle. And I stepped out of the corporate chase to give myself a little bit of a break and basically worked in a role that was below me in every way, shape, or form. But in order to regain clarity about what I have to offer, what I understand, I needed to go into that space so that when I came out of it, I would be in a much better place to take on what was left of my professional working life cycle. And that time, that space, what I learned, put me in a position to kind of meet this organization just in time and to do all of the things that I had already been doing well elsewhere and move myself along professionally in a pretty quick turn, simply because I took that break, released a lot of that, and then went where I was seen. That makes sense?
That makes perfect sense. I love that.
Nothing that I'm doing, like everything I'm doing, I was taught how to do in these large corporate spaces. But for whatever reason, many of them, there were certain decisions that were made that I wasn't the one at this point, that point, and the third point. I've worked for people who I was smarter than for at least 75% of my career. I've tried let me feed it to you. And then you're going to be kind and say, all right, let me grab you and pull you up. I've tried let me hold back. I've tried let me try to go around you. I've tried every single tactic to get to today, because with the exception of 2 people that I can think of very specifically, not including Mike King, 2 people who I've worked for that I knew that their intention was for me to go further, and both of them were women. But again, I've been working since the 1900s. So, and one is a woman of color, so to speak. But again, so my entire career was lensed around the decisions, the feelings, and the choices of white males. So imposter syndrome, no. It's like, oh, no. I belong in all of it. All of this, I'm supposed to be here.
Yeah.
So it made me not that great about salary negotiation, but I fixed that. I think I've got that. I even got my arms around that as well. But yeah, my lack of trust and suspicion and what's the other word? Skepticism when it comes to my professional career, I've had to work through it. So also therapy, but just taking that break and working in a space and trying to figure out like all of my valuable gifts. That was a learning experience. Shout out to that organization. I see you every once in a while checking my LinkedIn.
So you said that one of them was a woman of culture. So what are a woman of color? So
yes, I don't know if she would describe herself. I think she would describe herself as.
So what was the first time, this is just an open question for either of you, what was the first time that you actually saw a Black woman or worked with a Black woman doing what you do and were able to maybe, even if it wasn't like direct mentorship, kind of just use them as a source of representation and kind of look at what they were doing and model it? Did you ever have what was your first experience seeing somebody and being like, oh, you're like me?
So seeing that I have a dual career, I would say, right? So more so corporate and then music. I actually interned at an investment company. And at that time, one of like the top investment bankers was a Black woman. And I didn't really know anything about investment banking before I went to go work for that company. And she was literally the only Black woman within that team. And at that time, it wasn't anything that I had even thought about because I didn't know any investment bankers per se, right? And I knew how busy she was, and she still made time to, explain things to me, ask me if I had any questions. And this was in between her dipping and dodging between client, like physically going to see clients and whatnot. Now, although I don't want to necessarily go into investment banking or anything in the financial sector, from a corporate standpoint, she really solidified just the point of making time for people that may not necessarily have their way and sharing whatever resources that you have with them. Now, from a music standpoint, I would say my friend, who's also my producer, V Notes, and she's been doing music full time for years. And she completely made that transition before it was like a popular thing to do, online. And I've seen that she's been able to foster, manage relationships. She has a very high standard of work, quality of work. And she is the most popular person that is not online. So that says something to her work because literally everyone knows of her and she's not very active online. So I think between the two of them is just really making time for people who take their jobs seriously or take just a level of curiosity to a point where maybe it could be something for them later on, So shout out to them.
My first Black woman that I saw in corporate America was my mom. She worked in corporate America for my entire life. She worked her way up. She was an accountant, and she, I don't know, we saw her get dressed every day, and she was the lady with the sneakers on and her socks with her work outfit. And then from there, she went to driving to work because her parking was covered. And as she kept growing within her career and taking opportunities and just taking the steps up and talking to us about that and that growth and how to conduct yourself in those spaces and what not to do. Big on don't share a lot of your business. You don't want these people in your business kind of energy. Very much you need to not be seen as someone that could be taken advantage of in any way, whether it's passing their place with you sexually or trying to have you kind of come out of character. All of that stuff that, the elders taught us, the code switching and the being better than everybody, because that's what you have to do in order to be considered, which is not healthy at all. It's the opposite of the imposter syndrome that y'all talk about, the idea that you have to be better than the person who came up with the thing in order to be 7 rungs down because, they're always going to question why you're here type of thing. So it was a lot of good and bad. And then I would say in college, I had an internship in Brooklyn with someone who, a marketing professional who gave me gems for the older, in your 20s about how to conduct yourselves in the event. Because I thought about wanting to work in media in the music industry. So she gave me a lot of gems about what not to do and where not to go and what not to say yes to keep myself safe and to keep my name clean. But that's the thing. They were both counseling me from a position of that you are always going to be in battle about your safety, about the safety of your reputation, about the safety of your reputation in every way, whether it was your reputation sexually or your reputation professionally. Don't ever date anyone. Don't ever. So 35% of people meet their partners at work, but everyone is saying to you, now, if you do this, everyone's going to know, and they're going to see you in this way, that way, or the third way. Whereas you see your counterparts running through departments, just figuring life out, and it's not a big deal. Going on, I remember being taught, if my mom can see me, she knows I don't do this no more. But I remember being taught to have 1 drink at a work function, and then the rest of the drinks needed to be ginger ale because nothing that you do is going to be forgotten. So you don't even go to happy hour and get a little tipsy with these people. always on guard. That is very oppressive. But in order to try to get where you need to go, now you have to be like a super person, which is not uncommon. You hear this as a plight with Black women across the board, but we spend more of our time at work than we do at home. So now you can't even drink if you drink, because if you get drunk, and meanwhile, people are throwing shoes, people are getting drunk at Christmas parties, people are getting caught having sex with people that aren't their spouses, people are doing all this stuff, and you're just a perfect, good little girl, and you're still not really going where you're supposed to go professionally. So what's it all for? So kind of shout out to the millennials for being like, F half of that, because it's not changing anything. It was like oppressive and respectable for no real good reason and to really no real benefit. Like,
but to their defense, right? Like that's what they knew, and that's probably a very watered down version of what their mothers had to, go through. And we're not even that.
Mothers had no concept. Yeah. Think about it.
Right.
They didn't have a concept of what to tell you to do.
Right. Because women in the workforce and then the level of independence that we have now, is something that, our great grandmothers couldn't even imagine. So,
yeah, they just wanted you to be well-read and well-spoken. Right. They pushed well-read, well-spoken, well-read, well-spoken. I remember my great aunt saying to me, I'm so happy for you and so proud of you, because you're going to get to go to school and you're going to get to go to college and you might even become a secretary. And to her, because where she had come from, and she was born in the early 20th century. And she had lived a life, I think she worked as a domestic. She lived in Brooklyn. She had a beautiful life, a fly life, honestly. She didn't live in the South. She didn't want to. She lived her city life. But to her, the next step was they let girls like you in offices now. You can be a secretary. And I was like, secretary? Nah, I'm going for the gold. But to her, that was the goal. Yeah. You weren't working in anyone's house. You weren't working under like a person. You were going to go and you're going to have freedom. And she's like, and you'll have your own money. And you can do what you want. And you don't got to take shit off of nobody. And that literally was that was the other side of it. I was being taught, like, go for it. Do everything you want to do. Because you have your own. You don't got to take shit off anybody. Like,
even if it's beyond, their knowledge of whatever it is that we want to do, I think that even though we still have to face certain things, right? The hope is that, the next generation is going to have to, are these things going to be eliminated overnight? No, but hopefully, with everything going on and hopefully people or coworkers being more mindful of the world surrounding them and outside of their lives, the next generation will be in a better place. And it will be much further and more of a giant leap than anything that we probably could even imagine, right?
I appreciate your optimism. I am not as hopeful as you. But again, I am sitting in a space of skepticism because I've heard people who are younger people say different versions of things that white boomers have said to me, but in a different tone, because that stuff doesn't die. So I'm not really sure what we are to do. Aside
we don't have to do anything. That's not our job. Like, we don't have to do anything but be the best version of ourselves. But I feel like people have gotten better at mixing certain things in the bud as well. So we'll see. I'll take the optimism road.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever going to go away completely, but I
don't think it's going to go away.
One of the great things that's coming back is shame and shaming people for just some of those things, like the microaggressions, like the overt and covert racism. Like, I think it's a good thing that people are being shamed to at least keep it out of the office. And if you want to go back to keeping these things behind closed doors, by all means. I would love for it to be like a thing.
I don't know,
but
I would tell you that in the last 5 years, I had a person get mad at me because I would not let them touch my hair in the workplace.
Yeah, I believe that. I think last year we were doing the Black Music Month webinar, and we got an email from somebody who wasn't a registrant, but decided to go through the registration page so that they could send out an email to tell us how offended they were that we were running a webinar during Black Music Month for Black musicians and trying to just to try to educate them on marketing in the music industry. So I think it's going to be here. But I mean, the idea that you would go through an entire registration form to submit that to a Black-owned business is, that's something. But
the audacity never shocks me. I don't believe that. I am not optimistic. I just know that the tools I will use to fight are different than before. That's all. And I can spot it way faster.
So to that point, I think one of the things that I want to wrap this up with is obviously we all work for a Black-owned business currently, and throughout our corporate careers, we haven't. So what could you just take a couple minutes to just describe the differences that you experience now working at IPR as opposed to some of the other places that you've worked in your career as a Black woman?
I would say this is the most informal yet formal corporate job that I've had, because, speaking to Mike, he's like, hey, what's up? Yo, I need something. And clearly I'm not like offended. He's like, I'm like, hello, how are you? How may I help you? So I think even having the same cultural similarities, they help a lot. Like this is the most interesting job that I've ever had, mainly because of the group of people that I've worked with, but mainly because the fact that I work for a Black-owned company. I understand the goals of the company, and it's more so from a standpoint of like, I'm proud to be able to contribute whatever it is that I can in order to help Mike and the company get to where it is that he and we want to go, mainly because working in different environments, you understand how hard it is for him to even get to this point, right? And it's been very, very interesting journey during the time that I've been here. So yeah.
So I don't use the word manifestation. It's just not a word I use. But it was brought to my attention that I kind of manifested this job, sort of. I was having a conversation, like I told you, I took a break and I was working in a role that was definitely below my skill set and knowledge base, but it paid the bills. And I remember sitting down with my podcast partner, and I was like, I just want to work in this place where I don't have to explain myself. Maybe I can work for an organization that's like founded by like a Black woman. And then I don't have to explain myself and my existence, period. Because a lot of what is happening to Black women in corporate America, because a lot of people don't know us, is trying to explain yourself. So the fact that I ended up getting a phone call from a person who did not identify themselves as the owner of an organization and have a conversation that led to a conversation that led to a conversation that led to a job offer, all without me sending a thank you note, it all worked out. And even though Mike is not a Black woman, Mike is a man that I've found in working with him has a tremendous amount of respect for Black women, understanding and appreciation. He's pretty good at letting us speak and think and do in a way that I don't think everyone's always that equipped to do. If Black men were doing the best things they could do in corporate America, it would be that one thing that he does, which is allowing, listening, considering, trusting, and giving space. That's what the hope is when you're working in a space like that. So for it to be that, because I was skeptical, because I was like, oh shit, is this going to be some bullshit? It wasn't. It's not, you guys. It's been almost 4 years. It's not. And Mike would say things to me when I first joined, like, we're gonna do great, we're gonna do great things. And I was just like, we'll see. We'll see. And then we just kept doing great things and more great things and more great things. But I was like, all right, he's okay. Because I'm not an easy sell. And there's been times that I've had to, like, I've seen things even occur with him where I'm like, hey, you think this is happening because you're Black? And I don't know how he feels about that, but like, it was like corporate things. And me as a Black woman, just being like, I don't know, I see like my brother here being treated in a way or being positioned in a way that feels very not cool. Like, because again, I've been working since the 1900s. So I've seen what bosses do. I've seen what managers do. I've seen what leads do. I've seen what people accept from people. So sometimes when I hear things or see things positioned in a certain way, I'm like, are you sure it's as bad as you say it is? Or is it just terrible coming from
them? Oh my. This has been...
You can feel free to cut that part out if you want to. But I'm just saying, It's not, it is, being Black in corporate America is difficult. I believe, I only say 13, but I think we might be 20% of the population, as a lot of people are confused. But our representation in corporate America is still too low, considering how college educated folks are. And I'm like a slacker in my social group. I would say 80% of the women that I'm friends with all have master's degrees.
But you know what, too, really quickly? I think a lot of people probably don't even want to deal with it. And that's maybe why you might see a rise in entrepreneurship within our community as well, because it's probably just better off. Yeah.
See, my age group has side hustles. They don't, we were socialized to, no. How are we going to pay these bills until we 66? So it's definitely millennial women. I'm so impressed.
Yeah.
And God bless. But I would definitely say the Gen X ladies are like, but I'm going to have 2 jobs. It's going to be nuts. I'm going to have 2 jobs, try to be attractive, try to work out, try to do. But like, no, y'all just cut and run. And I love that for y'all.
Yeah, I mean, with the way that the economy looks, it could be 2 jobs for a lot of us out here going forward. But this has been an incredible conversation. I would love for us to continue the conversation, which we will be doing through our IPR Black 365 page on our website.
I love it.
We have the Black History Month webinar coming up on February 23rd, where we'll be going through the marketing industry and how Black culture has impacted it. And so I'm Aaron Johnson, Senior Digital Marketing Specialist here at iPullRank. This has been an episode of the Rankable Podcast. Is there anything that Shantel or Neferkara that you would like to promote? Thank you again for listening to our special Black History Month episode of the Rankable Podcast. As mentioned before, we'll be having our Black History Month webinar all about the influence and impact of Black culture on the marketing industry on February 23rd at 3 p.m. And we will also have our IPR Black 365 page of our website launching as well, where you can find resources as well as some more content from Black professionals. Thanks again. As always, like and subscribe, share it anywhere where folks are willing to listen. If you know anybody who's into this type of content, we'll catch you next time.